to the panel discussion today. What we've got in store for you, I think, is a very interesting event, and we're hoping to get a lot of audience participation. We all know that general education is the part of a student's curriculum that affects not only a student across all departments, but affects all departments in their interaction with the student. And at Stony Brook, we place very high priority on the quality of our general education curriculum, and in conjunction with the 50 Forward project, we're working to develop the next generation of general education within our committee. And as part of that effort, and in the hope of engaging more of the university community, we've invited a distinguished panel of speakers today to host a discussion on the issues and the future of general education, not just here at Stony Brook, but also across the United States. So I'd like to invite the panelists up. I'm trying to figure out alphabetical order in my head, and so I believe that would be Sue Faerman, and Graham Spanier. So today's panel discussion is going to have a very particular style. I'm taking it from panel discussions in my own field, and that means the style is going to be up to you, and the content is going to be up to you. We're going to set several general topics that will cover the course of an hour and 20 minutes, and we're hoping that in addition to comments from our distinguished panel, we can also elicit many questions from the people who are concerned about general education. But before we begin that part of the program, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and their background so that you get to know who they are.
Hi, I'm Sue Faerman. I'm the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education at the University at Albany. My faculty appointment is in the Department of Public Administration and Policy, but I will also say that I have an undergraduate degree in Applied Math and Statistics from Stony Brook.
I'm Ralph Kuncl. I'm the provost at the University of Rochester. I am a neurologist and neuroscientist by trade, and probably got my first leadership role in higher education as a vice provost for undergraduate education, precisely because I didn't have a dog in the fight. I didn't come with preconceived notions or turf that I had to defend in undergraduate education or general education, and that has served me well as I've gone to a provost position.
I'm Graham Spanier. I'm currently the president of Penn State University, a role that I've been in for more than 15 years now. And if you go back 3 positions before that, I was the first vice provost for undergraduate studies at what we then called the State University of New York at Stony Brook. That was in the 1980s, and I was part of the administration that came in with Jack Marburger as president and Homer Neal as provost, and in this new position that was focused on undergraduate studies. My office was on the 3rd floor of the library, and the position at that time I know is configured very differently than your administrative roles were configured at that time, but it was a great experience for me with a lot of exposure to the many workings of this university, and it's a great pleasure to be back on campus and to see the phenomenal changes and progress that have been made here that you are all a part of.
Thank you. So moving on to our first topic. This is the one I actually hear from students most often. As we progress, we find that careers and people are winding up being more and more specialized, majors break into subdivisions, et cetera, et cetera. Is it still relevant in the 21st century that we should have a general education curriculum, or should we be allowing people to basically focus more on their major? What do you think?
I'm happy to start with that. I think it's more important than ever to have a general education curriculum. And I think even if you start from the notion of careers as being important, the fact is that people these days are really changing careers over the course of their lifetime. Unlike when I was growing up and you'd hear these stories about how you'd graduate from college and get a job and stay with an organization for how many years, most of the people I know will talk about not just changing jobs, but changing careers, which means that students really need a preparation for lifelong learning. We tell our students today that the jobs that they might have when they graduate or 5 or 10 years after they graduate may not even exist today. And certainly, if you look back 5 or 10 years, there's a lot of changes in technology and things like that that have created a whole new set of careers today. So if our students are really going to be prepared for even careers in the future, they really need to have a general education which has prepared them for that kind of lifelong learning experience. So I'm a strong believer in general education being even more important than it was 25 or 50 years ago.
I would affirm that and tell you what I tell every parent of a new student. I first of all tell the freshmen, ignore what your parents tell you. And I tell the parents in the room, the purpose of our college education, the kind that we are here to offer, is not to prepare you for your first job, but to prepare you for career change in your 50s. There's not a one of us at this table that went to school to become a provost, a president, or a vice provost. And there's a great truth to that. But the other thing that's different about the current collegiate generation is that they're living in an information age. They are bombarded with information and further misinformation. One of the most interesting ideas I learned this morning was about your program in the School of Journalism about news literacy. How important could it possibly be to teach our young people how to make inferences from data, how to be literate quantitatively, how to understand beyond what is said in the terse soundbite, to really be wise. And that can only come from a broad approach to education. And then another reason for breadth is to have communication skills a part of our general education experience. And that's because no matter what a person does, it's almost a certainty that they're going to be asked to write reports, express themselves in a group or a committee, or become a leader. And so the ability to articulate orally and in writing is critical, and that's part of the general education experience. So I say yes, yes, it's ever more important.
Well, I agree entirely. I think general education continues to be extremely important, and in some ways, maybe more important than ever. I believe that you judge the quality of a university and the success of a university not so much on the basis of the students that you have here today, but on what they go on to do 10, 20, even 50 years after graduation. And therefore, the role of a university in preparing students for what happens later in life is extremely important. And a lot of what they learn in the general education curriculum, or should learn in the general education curriculum, may be even more relevant than what they learn specifically in their major. If you take a student in engineering or in sociology or name any field, much of what they do in the course of their career is going to be different than the specifics of what they learn in their curriculum in the major while they're in college. It provides good training and good discipline for them to get started, but they're going to have to evolve from that. And the kinds of concepts that your committee is discussing as a part of general education, areas like critical thinking and communications, and having quantification skills and the ability to interpret things, having some exposure to American culture and pluralism and languages and so on. These are very important things later on. I believe there are two basic questions that need to be asked in relation to general education. The first question that the faculty should be asking is, what do we expect today's graduates to need to have in their portfolio of knowledge by the time they graduate that will position them well for the future that's ahead? And then I think the second question that the faculty of any particular university needs to ask is, what do we want a Stony Brook graduate to have? The Stony Brook faculty should be asking, what do we, the faculty of this university, think our graduates need to have? What's unique about our stamp on this? If you can't identify that, you don't have anything to say about it, and if you haven't had a plan to work through it, then what would you tell a prospective student about why they should come here versus why they should go somewhere else? So I think both of those are equally important topics to digest as a part of the exploration of general education.
So let me follow up on that. What are the new areas? What are the differences in student needs now? We heard information age, that's so important to bring in critical thinking, but does this also mean that existing general education curriculums are effectively obsolete because of the changes in underlying technologies and student needs? Do we need revision, and are we going to need revision more and more often in the future? Or are there basic principles that are invariant in time?
Want me to start again?
Anyone who wants, jump right in.
All right. I would say that many of the needs are the same sorts of needs, but with a slight twist on them. So, for example, as people think about the disciplines, one of the key aspects of thinking about the disciplines is not actually the content of what you learn, as Graham said, but the approach to knowledge, the approach to critical thinking within that discipline. What are the different ways of thinking, and how do different ways of thinking affect how you think about any particular problem? In the workforce today, there's a lot of interdisciplinary kind of groups that work to come together to make decisions. And if people are only thinking from their own particular discipline, if they're only understanding how the world works from their particular perspective, then it makes for a very difficult decision-making process. So while in the past we would focus on the disciplines, I think part of it was in terms of thinking about breadth in the curriculum. I think that there's much more to be gained in terms of looking at the comparisons across the disciplines. And why does a particular area study a particular problem in a particular way, different from how another area might solve that? So for me, much of it really comes back to the issue of critical thinking and the use of information in that critical thinking process, and whether that information used to come to us on paper or now it comes to us on the internet, and it comes daily, being able to sort out that information and evaluate that information. It really, for me, still comes down to the notion of it, for lifelong learning, for lifelong planning, you need to understand what kinds of information you're getting and how to evaluate that information, and what are the biases built into that information from the way the original question was posed. And so I think that that's an important piece of thinking about how one understands the aspects of looking at discipline-based pieces of it, as well as the pieces that look directly and self-consciously at critical thinking.
I would say that the most important direction in which general education ought to evolve, has been evolving, is to focus on what great research universities can do so well, and that is to tackle the very big questions. What do I mean by that? Society doesn't present research universities problems to their history department or to their mathematics department. Take as an example the issues surrounding water shortage and water quality. These are geological, political, sociological, the result of war and peace, and have religious implications as well. You can't solve the world's problem with water, which, by the way, was the cover story of a recent National Geographic magazine. A very fascinating, big problem. You can't solve that in a department. It is clearly, at its presentation, multidisciplinary. It's exactly what a research university can do. And that's what our kind of students at Stony Brook are most intrigued by. They would love nothing more than to tackle the big problems of society in a multidisciplinary way. This is not applied kind of research, but it's digging deep into the multiple facets of a big problem. And it's for that reason that I think the approach to the category list in general education is obsolete. The cafeteria plans, my least favorite gen ed rubric of all is the one that Duke University came out with about a decade ago. And it's the most complex matrix of ways of learning and domains of knowledge. It is so complex that no advisor can administer it, no student wants it, and the faculty really can't even fathom it as well. It's just an obsolete way of looking at things, checking off boxes. And instead, I would see the future of gen ed to be not about category checkoffs, but about student choice. And it's the student choice aspect that has completely informed the approach that we take at Rochester, which is a cluster system. It has some similarities to the themed tracks that you've talked about and will talk about. But the idea is to capitalize on the greatest motivators that energize students, and those are choice and autonomy. Think of yourself at a Manhattan wedding, a wedding banquet. You're sitting down at a dinner and you're served something that somebody else decided you were going to eat that night. Now think instead of one of those other kinds of banquets where you have a wall of 500 things to choose from. Which one of them will create for you the most pleasing experience or the most balanced diet? Well, actually, there's a whole field of science that says humans and guinea pigs and rabbits and rodents, if given a bountiful supply of choices, will choose a nutritionally balanced diet that does not result in obesity unless you overload the choices with lots of carbohydrates and chocolate. And so this is a natural, biological, physiological thing that I think we can capitalize on. So the essence of the kind of autonomous choice system that I would advocate in the future is something like the cluster system. It relates to what UC Riverside and some of the UC campuses have done as well. And it says simply to students, there are no boxes to check off. You need to have 3 clustered experiences. One of the clusters is a major, and the other 2 clusters can be chosen from this list of 250 categorized groups of courses that are numerous, so you get choice, and are cohesive. The faculty have certified that there is coherence and a core into this. It's not merely an admixture of 3 things to study. And so in the end, the general education experience is having drilled down 3 deep tunnels. It's not the same as an education that is broad by virtue of being an inch deep and a mile wide. Rather, it's digging down very deeply. And because it involves choice and autonomy, and those are tremendously motivating for students, it results in a great love of learning. And how could we do better than that?
University presidents are often described as an inch deep and a mile wide, which actually is part of what makes the job kind of interesting. Just to pursue the general theme, though, first of all, I think it's important and it's good for universities to take a fresh look at their general education curriculum every decade or two, because things do change, or ought to change. But we have a tendency in higher education today to push towards increasing specialization. There are some good reasons to do that at the graduate level. You know, we have a lot of very highly specialized majors, fields, combinations of fields, because at the graduate level, you are preparing people for research careers in the typical case, and they need to be able to drill down further. But I'm not sure that's necessarily what we want for our undergraduates. Certainly, if they have strong requirements in their major and their programs are accredited, they will get that. But at the same time, we want to do what I described earlier with regard to general education. Now, if you somebody once said, maybe it was me, I don't remember, society has problems, but universities have departments. And a couple of you laughed, right? But I mean, it's true. And some of the greatest advances today are coming at the boundaries between disciplines, right? The boundaries between music and theater, the boundaries between psychology and sociology, between the life sciences and material sciences, between medicine and information technology. You could all name a handful of these readily. And we recognize that increasingly at the graduate level, but at the undergraduate level, students don't have enough information yet to be able to get to that level of specialization. So one of the things I think we want to try to do in our general education courses is to expose them to these disciplines in a way that they can think across these traditional boundaries. And so some of the concepts that are in the draft documents and the presentation that your committee chair and his colleagues have prepared, I think are a very good step in the direction of encouraging students to think across these boundaries and to be exposed to a variety of things. And I think you're on the right track there.
Yeah, step up to the mic.
Hi, I'm April Maston. I'm in the history department, also on the Gen Ed committee here at Stony Brook. And I hear this terrible contradiction, which is that we need to expose the students to more disciplines, but we also need them to give the choice that they will choose, that autonomy is the way they get the best education. And there's the two problems I'm hearing is one, if we don't direct them, I mean, first of all, general education is directing them in a certain direction. We are actually asking them to try different disciplines that they wouldn't necessarily try otherwise. And if the faculty isn't speaking to each other across those boundaries, because we're in discrete departments, we're not actually furthering that goal either. So the two issues are, I mean, this is kind of an indication of how many faculty are interested in general education, not recognizing that it's, of course, we're all participating in it. And so, you know, if the students have all the choice, the faculty remains the same in their discrete departments. And so just asking that, I'd like to lay those problems out. So.
Well, having been through this, by my count, 4 times, I can tell you that as hard as the committee is working on this, the harder part will be the implementation. You'll submit a nice report, and then the vice provost his headaches will begin. What I've found typically is that there is actually, it's almost the opposite of what you would think, that faculty wouldn't mind having lighter teaching loads and so on. But when it comes to the implementation, there will be a big rush from the departments to be the ones to teach the courses. And the more your institution has a formula where departments are rewarded for generating credit hours, the more that will be the case. And I don't know if that exists here now. It used to exist within the SUNY system. There was something called the Freeman-Anslow formula, and we all lived in fear of it after years of trying to understand it. And so I don't know to the extent to which resources are allocated that way, but a lot of departments will want their courses to be the ones to qualify. But you'll find that implementation will be difficult. At our university, part of our last general education implementation, we created something called freshman seminars, because we have now 44,000 students just at our main campus, 95,000 across all of our campuses. And half of our classes are very small and half of them are very large. And we thought we want to make sure every freshman is in a small class of no more than 20 where certain aspects of the general education curriculum can be deployed. And everybody loved that idea, but it continues years later to be a bit of a struggle to staff all of those seminars. And some of the departments were gung-ho getting their classes to be the ones to do all these new creative things. Then they start to struggle with how they're going to get the faculty lined up to teach them. Because guess what? A lot of the faculty would prefer teaching graduate seminars than one of the general education courses. And then you're faced with, okay, graduate students, adjuncts, part-time, temporary instructors, and so on. So you are absolutely right. There are contradictions built in here, and a lot of them are not so much at the philosophical level. Your chair here gave a brilliant presentation this morning about how much sense all of this made to all of us. I mean, it's very persuasive. I think you'll all like what's going to evolve. But I think you'll find that in the implementation, it gets very tricky, and reconciling some of those issues will be a challenge.
Let me add to that and say I agree with the difficulties in implementation of anything that is interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. And I don't want to just spout those words and let 1,000 flowers bloom, you know. It's actually more expensive to mount interdisciplinary courses. It's more difficult to teach in an interdisciplinary course. Probably takes you more time as a professor. And I mean truly multidisciplinary courses. I don't mean where the religion professor comes in and does his thing and the classics professor comes in and does her thing at a later date and the English professor, you know, there's no interaction. I mean when you're there together, bringing together all the multiple ways of knowing, that's a harder task. So implementation of these sorts of things are always difficult. And some of our interdisciplines have now matured into, you know, the same as a department. History is I think that's your department. It's an inherently interdisciplinary space in the academy. So I don't hold that out as a method of solving general education. I really don't. And I believe pretty strongly that interdisciplinary doesn't exist until there is a foundation of the disciplines. And it's especially true for 18 and 19-year-olds. It's great to have the freshman seminar on the wildest general topic, but truly you have to dig deep into a discipline and understand that way of knowing to understand the opposite ways of knowing that are in other disciplines, and then multidisciplinarity comes to life. It's just, my point is simply that it will be a part of your solution to general education.
As I said when I introduced myself, my home department is public administration and policy, and in that department I teach managerial leadership. One of the fundamental things I teach about managerial leadership is that all performance is paradoxical. And what I mean by that is that the expectations that people have for the kinds of performance are going to be at odds with each other. So let me just give you one quick example. In any organization, You create an organization because you want some stability. You don't want chaos. You don't want everybody running around and doing lots of different things. You want organization. And yet, if the organization is always stable, always does the same thing, it becomes stagnant. You need flexibility. And so somewhere in between the flexibility and the stability is going to be competing demands. And if you approach it from the perspective of looking for either-or solutions, you're going to end up on one end of the spectrum or another, as opposed to both-and solutions that try to accommodate both the needs for both flexibility and for stability. And I think the same is true in terms of specialization and generalization. We certainly need specialization, and I would argue that even though undergraduates don't necessarily need to be as specialized as a graduate program, that many of our undergraduate degrees do call for some amount of specialization, and maybe some of our graduate degrees call for too much specialization. You know, nevertheless, I think the place is to choose between generalization or specialization, but to identify ways in which generalization and specialization are both valued, and for us to do some education of ourselves, our faculty, our students, of kind of more of a both-and way of thinking. The comment that was made before in terms of the boundaries and the problems that we face with the boundaries often are because we think about, should we approach it this way or that way, when both approaches really add to the potential solution. And so I guess one of the things that I would encourage is to think about ways in which synergies can exist, and sometimes there are trade-offs. You know, sometimes there are kind of either or, but I would say that as you look at what students need now and preparing them for their job 5 years out, five careers out, whatever that is, that the preparation needs to be both to be able to be deep in an area, that kind of specialization, but also to have the capacity to understand across areas. And I'm going to say that in my one of the pathways for me to my current position was that in 1996 I was involved in a new program at the university called Project Renaissance, where we self-consciously taught interdisciplinary courses to freshmen. And the truth is that the first 2 weeks of the semester, the first 3 or 4 month, they couldn't understand why they had a bioclimatologist, a linguist, and a management specialist in the same room at the same time teaching about human nature and all those sorts of things. But by the end of the semester, and we were actually fortunate enough to be able to teach the course for a year, our students talked about the differences in that course from what they had gotten in the other courses, and really understood that they were being taught a whole more intense way of critical thinking than they had gotten in many of their other classes. So I wouldn't underestimate the ability for students to really grasp the notions of multi and interdisciplinary even before they have a firm foundation if you approach it in the right way. Was that program really sustainable, having 3 faculty from 3 completely different areas long term? Not as sustainable as we hoped it would be, but we certainly do have faculty who continue to try to create opportunities for them to be in the same room with faculty from different departments to be able to look at how you look at problems from different perspectives. And I think that excitement should be ever present on a college university campus. We're here to learn. I mean, we say we're here to teach, but I think I'm on a college campus and have been there most of my life because I want to learn. And so if we approach it from that perspective, then there's as many opportunities for faculty participating to learn from our colleagues as we hope our students get. Yes.
Say it in the mic so it's on the recording. Thanks.
This gentleman had a question about it had to do with students after they graduate from undergraduate, and he was saying that they're asked to specialize so much and they're asked to just fulfill these requirements, and then they go back home and they can't get a job and they don't know what they want to do with their lives because they were concentrating so much on just wanting to graduate, to get their degree so they can move on with their life. What are your comments and feelings on changing that and having someone right from their undergraduate be able to go out into the quote-unquote real world and get a job and live life?
I have a
Was I clear?
strong aversion. I mean, that person learned a very difficult lesson at the moment of applying for a job. Should have listened to my speech 4 years earlier. And I have a strong aversion to the idea of collecting credentials. I am a major. I have this theme track. I have this. And the stark reality is when you apply for your first job, it's not the credential that gets you the job usually. It's who you are, how you present yourself, how you articulate yourself, and what other people say about your reliability. And fundamentally, how broadly can you think? Because you're going to learn what you're going to learn about that job, mostly on the job. And so it's not the readiness for job in the sense of credentials that we ought to be about. I think I'll use an example I learned today. It's an example of how general education happens. Breadth happens. It's not something imposed by a distribution requirement. The greatest definition I ever heard of a distribution requirement is hire the very best faculty you can and distribute them over the students, which is what you just described in your example. And so my example from this morning is your dean, Dane Gillespie, who was a wonderful alum of my Eastman School of Music, where there is no distribution requirement, no breadth requirement, and he came to learn and perform the French horn. Well, there must be something about the environment that created great breadth that enabled him to become a scholar and to do vastly different things than to blow in a French horn. And that is exhibited to me every day by Eastman graduates who, because they've been surrounded by an incredible peer group, and it's the peer group that gives us most of our broad education, I believe, and because in order to be a great musician, one has to dig down deep into the history of the context that informed a particular composer. One has to learn a language in which the music was created in the first place. One becomes automatically broadly educated. So I think we underestimate students sometimes when we say that we can only impose breadth through a construct, rather than having a lot of faith that it often happens. Now, I don't want to carry this too far. I really do believe that faculty have special knowledge, and we have a longer horizon of a 40-year career than the average undergraduate. But I think there's some truth hidden in that breadth happens.
Well, I agree with you at a philosophical level, but I'm going to give a somewhat different answer to that question. If I look at, in this difficult economy of the last 2 years, I can name for you the majors at our university that have 100% employment still. Accounting, all of the 22 fields of engineering that we offer, our School of Hospitality Management, believe it or not, and I could name another couple dozen examples. Whereas in our College of Liberal Arts, the employment of our recent graduates is maybe 50%. Those who are in majors that are getting a very specific preparation for certain careers, I have to say, are finding that there are jobs out there. Now, I don't know whether that was that was specifically the issue that the individual was raising before he left, but to me, how does it relate to general education? Well, it's about balance. I actually like some degree of specialization for our undergraduates so that at the time they graduate, they have something that they can market other than I'm well educated and I have a good personality, because in the world of employment today, that may not do it. The Wall Street Journal just did a survey, a national survey, it was very well done, I think, of all the major employers in the country and asked them, what universities do you most want to hire graduates from? Interestingly enough, the top of the list were mostly public universities, like yours and like mine. And many of the schools that have phenomenal reputations as academic institutions, but don't actually offer undergraduate degrees in some of the fields that we do that are a little more applied, let's say, don't show up. I think there's only one or two of those institutions in the top 20. So my point is that having a strong education, a general education curriculum with the concepts that we've been talking about here and that are embedded in your report, I don't think has to be at odds with having a major where you're learning something that's very marketable and that can be presented as a part of your identity. But I would love to have somebody argue back with me on that, and I know you would a little bit.
Well,
maybe a lot.
I'll point out a conflict that we've created for ourselves here. If the job is the outcome to be measured, then clearly the engineers and the accountants are going to have, they're going to be the winners. They're going to have those jobs in this particular time in our history. But contrast that with the other measurement of outcome that is being discussed, the collegiate learning assessment. Is that an outcome? It's just one measure. But it turns out that scores on the CLA actually are better amongst those liberally educated liberal arts majors and the humanists than they are amongst the more focused technical and applied majors. So let's be very aware of the conflicting outcomes that we've set up for ourselves in the academy. It's one reason I had to have a fight with the chair of our board of trustees over the Forbes magazine ranking. Our board members read Forbes like it's the Bible. And how could it be that University of Rochester is not ranked in the top 100 by Forbes? Well, it turns out that if you look at the methodology, a very big part of the ranking score was income measured in dollars in the first years out of college. Well, if that's our goal, to create income and jobs, it will be a driver for the kind of education we offer. And I'm not negating the value of money. I believe in money too. But a lot of our undergraduates came for passion. That will be played out in such fields as social work, where there's just not a lot of income to be had, and that will lower our Forbes rankings. It will perhaps screw up your outcome on the CLA, I don't know, but just there are probably multiple of outcomes that we ought to aspire to.
Go ahead.
I just also want to be careful, even if we're talking about jobs, of not narrowing ourselves to thinking about accountants and engineers. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs that are not tied to any particular major. they're tied to, as you said before, how you present yourself, ability to use critical thinking, to write well and to speak well. And so one of the things that I think is very important is to not always assume that a particular major is going to be tied to a particular career path. Most majors can take people to dozens, if not hundreds, of different career paths, and their ability to do that will also partly depend not just on what they did in their major, but the things tied to it. And I'm going to come back to the general education curriculum. I hope you don't mind my jumping the gun a little bit about the issue of experiential learning and what students do, not just sitting in a classroom, but also in terms of doing internships and seeing as an undergraduate how what they're learning, whether it be in a major or in something else that they're interested in some other area they're studying, of what is going on out there. I had a student last year who I ran into him partly because he ran afoul of our bureaucratic system, but in the spring of his freshman year, he went to Tanzania because he thought he wanted to be a public health major, but he wanted to be really sure that he wanted to study world health. And so he found this organization that takes young people around the world. He spent a semester in Tanzania working in a school and decided that his passion really was about global, kind of improving the world, whether it be in the education area, the health area, but he needed to be sure of that at the end of his first semester, and just had an amazing experience. Now, in general, would I encourage students to do that at the end of their first year? Probably not. Would I encourage them to do it in their third year? Absolutely. In their fourth year? Absolutely. During a summer? Absolutely. So having those sorts of experiences also changes how you think about what your education does for you and where you can go with your education. And so, I want to kind of decouple, other than accounting and engineering maybe, and maybe social work, majors from specific professions.
So I got to admit, you guys have inspired me. I'm totally sold. And so's everybody listening. And in fact, if you go up to somebody privately and you have a conversation with them, whether it's a faculty member or a student, you wind up everybody on board, gung-ho, general education is such a great idea. And then you ask them, okay, how are we doing? Do you like your general education? The typical answer from both the faculty side and the student side is, no, I'm unhappy. So where did we lose it? I'm sure, Graham, you said you were on 4 different committees that formulated these sort of things, and yet, in the end, where are we losing the passion of this part of the education by the time it gets into the classroom, both from the faculty member and from the student? Where's the disconnect?
I think you put your finger on it. There is an enormous disconnect in the mindset of the student who is sitting down with their advisor, as you described your advisor's experience, and the faculty advisor says, well, looks okay to me. You've checked off the boxes. And in the mind of the student is, I have checked off the boxes. I would like the advising experience, which is the great thing you can offer in a residential institution, to be a conversation more like this. What way do you, the student, want to commit to this thematic track outside of your discipline, and to what end? Those are the questions that will inspire a person to take, a student to take control of their own destiny and to love passionately what they do and to make choices that are their own. And to whatever extent you can package that into your general education program, you will succeed. And the opposite is true. To whatever extent it still is experienced as a box-checking or deck-checking exercise, it will fail.
I think the other thing goes back to the immediately prior conversation about the specialization and generalization. When I was growing up, again, the myth was get a college education and you'll get a job. And that has changed in the last few decades, and so students and their parents also are thinking in those terms that it's important to think about what is the job that I'm going to have, or what is the career path that I'm putting myself on. And we haven't shown, I think, to our students, and so it's hard for our faculty to see it either, how that general education really, in some ways, in many ways, in fact, does relate to a career path. And again, I'll go back to the idea that it's not just about that first job after college. It's a career path, it's a lifelong approach, and we just haven't made the case for that. And to the degree that, colleges have departments, our faculty haven't really, in many ways, been forced to think about a kind of that career path issue. And so they may not be focused in that way. And so they're not making that case to the students. So if the students are thinking, well, I want to be in my major because my major is going to get me to the job, and the faculty isn't understanding that it's not the job, it's a lifelong career full of lots of changes, I think there's disconnects in both ways. And I think faculty do, I truly believe in my heart that faculty do have the capacity to help students think about how what they're teaching is useful for our students' entire life, not just for the time that they're sitting in that classroom and maybe as a prerequisite for the next class. So I think it really does come back to thinking about connecting any piece of knowledge or skill, competency that we present to our students from a much broader perspective than how it fits right into that major.
Yep. Right up to the mic.
It's just, Elena, I work at the Career Center, so I could not respond to all this conversation about jobs and majors. I totally agree with you, Sue, that the question is that the problem is the students do not understand the situation as you just described it so eloquently. That yes, there are a lot of jobs which are available without no relations to the career. From our experience, students do not get these jobs, not because they don't have engineering majors, but because they do not understand these relations. They don't know how to connect the academic experience with jobs. Therefore, they are helpless and can't present themselves to employers, so they're not aware of opportunities which exist for them. So I just wanted to voice a strong feeling from where we sit and see Stony Brook students that part of their understanding what could be done to increase student commitment and enthusiasm. If they understand what you just described, they would be full of enthusiasm. If they believed that any major is good for careers, but they truly don't know that. We explained over and over again, we teach it in career-bearing classes, and they simply don't buy it because they heard differently from the society, right? So, question, I guess, at the end of it is, for example, we teach the value of general education as a part of the career course. We teach the career values of DEC requirements for the career purposes. And we encounter total lack of disbelief. They look at us as disbelief because that's what society projects. So the question is, to wrap it up, do you think that that understanding could be itself a part of the general education? The understanding of relations between education and life, could that be, this understanding be also a part of the bigger picture they're getting, right?
You're asking us to make the case to students, and that is exactly Tom's question. How shall we make the case? I think that if I have one book left in me to write, it will be entitled What You Can Do with an English Degree. And of course, that's a complete quandary for many 22-year-olds graduating with English degrees. If their faculty are only modeling to them academic careers, PhD careers, teaching careers with an English degree. It's probably less than 2, 3, 4% of the totality of what is out there for the English major. I would, if I were trying to make the case for general education, I'd assemble a panel of people for that group of graduating English majors, and I'd have on that panel a guy named John Gleer, who's a friend of mine and is the CEO of the world's largest company dedicated to consulting on philanthropy in higher education. So his clients are, I don't know if Stony Brook's one of them, or Penn State is. Grenzebach Gleer probably has 200 clients. It's the panoply, the A-list of institutions in the world, including Cambridge and Oxford. And this guy is an ABD in English. He was an English major, but he's able to read and write and appreciate the arts and converse with all manner of people all over the world. And that's just one of the multitude of things that a person can do with an English degree. And so I would say, I got to make that case to students that it's not about the job that is directly related to the major, and it's not about the major being your identity, even if your parents told you that. There's another great case to be made for the breadth that you have in your education.
So is that a freshman seminar that you're describing?
Well, it certainly, for some people, can be that. It can be the first experience in their life where they were asked to stretch a muscle way beyond what they thought they were capable of, and it may be the inspiration to breadth.
Tom, I have a question. I'm Graham Glynn, Assistant Provost for Teaching, Learning and Technology, a former employee of Penn State where having the first name Graham was an advantage. I'm wondering if we're trying to solve this problem in the wrong place. I'm a graduate of the Irish education system, and when I graduated high school, secondary school there, I went into college and specialized in science for 4 years. And my sense is that a lot more of the general education requirements were taught in the high school system back there, and that to some degree we're dealing here with a failure in the high school systems. They're abdicating their responsibility in this area, and we're trying to compensate. So to what degree should we be working with high schools to try and take over more of this responsibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen, I'm on all the Stony Brook mailing lists still, and I get all your publications. And if you look at the profile of the students who are coming to this university, it's very strong now, very, very strong. And so even though faculty like to complain that their students can't read or write or do math, the fact is, if you look at it in a national perspective, your students are pretty well prepared. So. And certainly the same is true at my institution. Nationally, though, I think it's fair to say that our high school system is failing us, and that a lot of the students that are coming into higher education in this country are not well prepared. You know, we're struggling with this question right now. For example, at my university, I am an advocate for upping the requirements for foreign language fluency upon admission to the university. I want to insist on a higher level of fluency. You know, a student who has had 2 or 3 years of Spanish in high school these days often can't do much more than tell you about a taco, burrito, tostita, and what they are. I have no idea what they're learning in their high school language classes, and I'm thinking, you know, maybe we just ought to say that you have to have 4 years of language in high school to come to Penn State. But people have lots of reasons why that wouldn't be good, and who would therefore not be eligible, and the students wouldn't do it, and the high schools aren't prepared to teach it. They don't have enough teachers to teach at that level. So I think we in higher education, unfortunately, have kind of adapted around the state of K-12 education today. And it's a real interesting question whether if we were more assertive about it and said, well, look, that's just the way it's going to be with us, whether the high schools wouldn't lift themselves up by the bootstraps and get it done. But, you know, I ask that more as a question than having a definitive opinion about what the right thing is to do.
I don't want to bash K through 12 too much, but because in some ways I think we have more amazing students than ever. Every year they're just more, they astound me. And they're coming with vast disciplinary knowledge. You know, they've got 7 AP courses and scores of 5 in all of them. And the job is for us almost, you know, let them loose and let them try and figure out connections between all of that. And they'll be fine. But the problem in America is the bimodal distribution of K through 12 with many, many have-not schools and some suburban have schools. And that's the problem because we get all of those students and some of them are critically unprepared.
I guess I would look at it from a slightly different perspective, and one of which goes back to, again, our conversations about what are the lessons. Director of our Advisement Services Center will tell the story about how her daughter in 9th or 10th grade was asked to write an essay on her career goals. And, you know, what do you know in 9th or 10th grade about the thousands of careers that are out there? So that message is starting very early. So in terms of for me, part of the issue that I would say in terms of high school is not only the preparedness issue in terms of the divided between the haves and the have-nots, but also, you know, what is the focus? You know, I think back on the fact that students don't specialize, they don't have a major in high school, but the high schools are being called on to teach so many things that we have students who are entering who, and our students have high grade point average or SAT scores, but many have not written a paper longer than 5 pages at the high school level. That astounds me. And so again, going back to critical thinking as a really core element of a curriculum, you know, a competency for lifelong learning, that's where I would want the high schools to do a little bit better in terms of moving some of that critical thinking a little bit more, rather than so much of the knowledge, but the critical thinking aspects.
We have lines forming at the mic, so I'm going to ask that for each question, one panelist, whoever jumps in first, be the one to answer. So we'll go over here.
I'm Joe Miyazaki. I'm a lecturer in undergraduate biology, and I'm on the front lines, and so a number of years ago when we tried learning communities, I was a strong advocate for it because I'm a biology teacher. I don't teach math, I don't teach English, I don't teach history. If I mention Aristotle, it was a problem because they didn't know who he was, and so I was very excited about learning communities, and the parts that worked were wonderful, but you had to have the right synergy of professors who could talk across disciplines, and the few classes where that worked, it was magical, but it's very hard to sustain. So my take on all of this is, yes, I need my students to learn about critical thinking. I need them to learn biology, but most importantly, I want them to understand what the process of science is. Because science is one way of knowing. And so we have lots of departments on this campus that teach science. The philosophy department here is wonderful. They teach a different type of way of knowing. There are other departments that teach other ways that our fabulous faculty inform their own fields about their work. And what I would love to see is, I would love to see general education teach students different ways of understanding our universe. And this is where I think we need our faculty more involved with our students, with their education. So many of our top researchers never see an undergraduate. They only deal with the elite students. And we've been slowly bringing high-level researchers into the undergraduate biology labs using videotaped interviews. And the students report an incredible change in their understanding of the way that research is done. You know, I never knew scientists thought that way. What I'd like them to also be able to do is when they leave, is philosophers think about this problem in a different way, and writers communicate this in a different way. So as you're doing these changes, I hope that
You have a specific question? I want to make sure we get to everyone.
Oh, sorry. The specific question is what particularly should be your goals? I mean, saying something is you need to teach students critical thinking. I'd like to understand what components of critical thinking in different fields that they can bring to that discussion.
I guess I'll jump into that and say that I agree with you 100% that biologists approach the world in one way, and even I would say, although the SUNY system would like us to think that all scientists think in one way, within the fields of sciences, there are different ways to approach problem solving. You know, I don't want to jump the gun on this idea of the themed tracks. But from what we heard from the General Education Committee this morning, one of these ideas is to think about these larger themes that ask questions that would say, how would a biologist look at this issue? How would a philosopher look at this issue? How would a political scientist look at this issue? You know, how would a public policy person look at this issue? And so that you have the opportunity to teach biology, but that you also put your students in a position to be able to be thinking about some of the very same problems that you can teach them about from people in other disciplines.
Question over here.
Yes, Peter Caravetta, European Languages. A couple of things. Preparing the critical thinking part, it's something that we should really be taking seriously, because it's not just like problem solving in the sense that we create undergrads who can go out and work and learn on the job, and then after 5 years, maybe the company moves to Indonesia and they have to find a different job and they're just problem solvers. That would only create an educated or partially educated workforce that can be easily moved around. Two, let's talk more concretely. I think we seem to, I have this feeling that we have all read the same things, the same chronicle, and except for some specific, you know, like university, you only have your specific problems at your university. But let's talk a little bit more concretely about exactly what we mean. You know, all the curricula has been changed in the 70s and the 80s. Because the times were changing, there's all kinds of revolutions and stuff, and we did away with the core requirement, you know, the Harvard, you know, baseline, or the University of Chicago had this kind of. Are we talking about something similar to that, with proviso that it's not just subjects which are platonic and eternal, like they used to believe in Chicago, but it's that things can be looked at from different perspectives? If we're thinking in those terms, then let's talk practically about answering one of the questions. What part of an undergraduate education should be dedicated to general ed? Would it be a year? 2 years, number one. Two, let's talk about clusters. Let's talk about guidance. The students need, I mean, it's true, we all mentioned this, we're all aware of this. We need guidance, not like, oh, well, I'm a biologist, I would suggest this, and I am a psychologist, I would suggest that. We need people who actually sit down and follow a student and consult perhaps with the professor. That's a little bit complicated to do, but I think that needs to be done, because they come to college, they really don't know what they want to do, which is fine, by the way, because some of the the good majors make up their minds in some professor's class. They get that spark, and then that's when they decide. But if they haven't experienced a number of fields, if they have never taken anthropology, I always ask my students, how many of you have taken film studies? Never. How many of you know about media literacy? Never. I said, well, you got to take that course before you get out. How many of you know about the environment? Nothing. He said, well, you should take a geology course. So by the end of my course, I've already told them to take 4, 5, 6, 7 courses in other departments. So I think that the discussion has to be, there should be not so much pressure on like getting a major from the first year. They should experience different departments, even the more technical ones. I mean, and three, the last remark about the super professors who never see undergrads, You know, at City College, the best teachers were the ones who had the Nobel Prize winners, used to teach introduction to physics and the introduction to chemistry. They were forced to do that, and it was a good thing. And the other one is, those of you who are in power, real power, would you please pass down the word that students should become citizens, not customers. They should not be addressed as customers. I understand that we're all struggling with funds and this and that, but this is really the last bastion before everything in this society is sold out. So at some point, an effort should be made to think of the future students as citizens of a society who know that there is a world out there, and that they, you know, well, thank you.
So I'm going to
just
thank you for a comment, and I didn't hear a question in there, so we'll move to the last question.
Could I
Yes,
just respond?
We'll pass down the word for you. In fact, I think you'll find that some of us are very involved in passing down that word.
Allegra De Laurentiis, Philosophy Department. I don't have a question. I would like to, first of all, thank the panelists because much of what was said really echoed with me. But I would like also to remind us all of some things that are being said both in Stony Brook committees and apparently all over the nation, and that take a life of their own as if they were truths that nobody has ever even dared countering. And one of these myths, in my opinion, that we all have to start thinking about, is that while the natural sciences and the applied sciences provide people with some content called specialization, the humanities are all about critical thinking. This is simply an incredible simplification, for whatever reasons, of the contribution of the humanities essentially to civilization and to having civilized citizens and well-informed citizens making up any given society. The humanities are not, we do not teach Aristotle or whoever in order to, or with the one goal in mind to foster critical thinking. They are as much about content as any introductory physics course. What we think sometimes our freshmen lack because of the problems that we have touched upon related to high school teaching, etc., is content. The idea here is not that we just want to foster the famous connecting the dots. Where there are no dots to be connected, nothing will be connected. Our students need an education. Certainly choice and preference should be an important motivator, but they have to be guided into this. They cannot choose among things that they know nothing about. So I would like to stress that although the humanities are not that part of education that helps one to make money, or to make excessive money, because there is money to be made if you don't exactly need too much of it. Although this is the case, and although they are, I understand, I mean, in American society, not very valued. I have been laughed at by my dentist when I once said that I teach philosophy. It was the greatest joke he had heard that month. He couldn't believe it. So, you know, although this is the case, and we cannot change that, certainly not from today to tomorrow or next year, I think that we should recognize more the content aspect of education and leave aside a little bit these other, sometimes, excuse me, gimmicks of critical thinking, interdisciplinary here, interdisciplinary there, because once more, one can do great jobs in interdisciplinary studying and teaching when one knows the discipline. But when one doesn't know the discipline, it's just going to be a lot of blah, blah. And then it comes the moment where the taxpayers get furious and they don't want to finance certain things because they've heard enough of that. So I don't have a question, Tom. I have just
Thank you for your comment.
reminder to myself, but also to my colleagues who are engaged in undergraduate education.
Tom,
Okay, I'm going to take a very. Do you want to?
Good. I really feel inspired to respond to the last three non-questions. Because general education will be an easy success here as long as there's the evangelistic enthusiasm that was demonstrated by the prior questioner. It's not an issue. You don't need a committee. You need more evangelists. And it will not be solved by using hackneyed phrases, as was pointed out by the philosopher. It's not about connecting the dots. I use all of those words all the time because I have such a limited vocabulary. And I hate the word interdisciplinary, but there it is, it just came out. But as long as some of the evangelists are humanists who remind us that it's not only the critical theory they teach and the comparatist theory, but it's the content, then you'll go back to the truth that I tried to express earlier, that is, there is no interdisciplinarity without disciplines in the first place. There must be content. But you have this wonderful word called infusion on the slide you showed. And I'm a true believer for the biologist that there are ways of infusing general educational breadth into even the most introductory biology course. And that's even in the syllabus and in a conscious presentation of the content throughout the course, so that the syllabus doesn't simply read, this day is photosynthesis and this day is intermediate metabolism, but that it actually has a moment where it consciously talks about the ways of knowing in science and the philosophy of science, and the fact that things have to be proven twice or more before anyone should accept it, or the concept of inference and critical thinking. That is, two things that are correlated in time or space are not causally related necessarily. And how to make informed inferences. All of those can be taught in an introductory biology course that delivers tons of content. So infusion plus evangelism is what I see as the themes of these last speakers.
Can I just add that I think it is really important to, because to recognize that critical thinking goes on in every discipline. I mean, that's how those of us, who are faculty members got to where we got to, because we wrote a dissertation that involved critical thinking in whatever discipline across the entire raft of disciplines that we have. And I think in the intro biology course, we're teaching critical thinking because we're teaching about how do biologists or how do chemists or how do physicists or how do environmental scientists or atmospheric scientists think about the world. That's critical thinking with content to it, as well as in philosophy or in linguistics or whatever other field that you go to. It really is about how do people within a discipline understand the world, and that's for me how I think about kind of taking apart this isn't just about what you know, but how you got to know it. And so and I think that's not what we're teaching that students in the high school. In the high schools, we're teaching them what they need to know. Here, we need to teach them how we have come to know that.
Okay, since we have a student in the microphone, even though we're over time, we're going to take one more question.
Hi, my name is Salvatore Caiola. I'm a third-year student at Stony Brook University. And upon completing the general education program, the one thing that I found was slightly an issue is the integration of majors and minors in some of the classes. Because in some of these classes, we'll have upper division classes, but they'll have to be watered down so that those who don't know the curriculum that's required for the class are actually enrolled with the majors. So my question is that, do you think it's necessary that we have generalization courses for the lower level for those who don't know what might actually be hurting the majors, since it has to be brought down, or to have some sort of theme based off of something like California University?
So, I guess
if
I
you want me to
understand the
clarify,
question, it's the
sorry.
question of mixing majors and people completing their gen ed. Is
Well,
that
generally
effective?
speaking, it should work. A course is a course, and it,
Yes, but
but there may be some instances where you have different populations within the university, and it would be appropriate to have different sections for
Yes.
majors or for general education, or call them different courses, because they're really not, if it's a 400 level course, maybe it really isn't. And maybe there should be a 200 level general education version and a 400 level version for majors or whatever. So in some cases it might be, and that's an issue for the faculty and the administration to work on. So you could be right that in some cases it's not optimum the way it exists, and I think that's something that that the administration could certainly look at.
Well, for example, like, I'm enrolled in a cinema course, and I'm a science major. The course has dropped all cinema terminology just so that people like myself can understand the course. Just taking cinema out of it, focusing on the major itself, that's not always fair for the majors. So I feel that there should be some form of generalization, you know, maybe 100-200 level rather than this 300-400 level class where we can automatically get an enrollment. Thank you.
Try to catch one of these folks sitting in the front row here to let them know privately what course you're talking about.
Thank you.
You know where I live. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to thank the panel very much for spending their time with us and their enthusiasm for general. And we have a small token for each of them. I recognize that many of you have memories of Stony Brook that go way back, not all of you, but we want you to have a small memory of your visit today. So, thank you again.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you very much.
Thank our speakers again.